Snow shredded the wreckage as the final transport burned out on the ridge. Crimson trails of coolant leaked into the powder. Her breath fogged inside the visor, flickering faintly as power dropped below life-sustainment thresholds. She tried moving, but the exoskeletal servo had locked. The cold would finish her before the atmosphere did. They'd told her not to travel without a house escort. But what escort would have mattered when the raiders came in a formation that moved like a blade? Precision strikes. Targeted. They hadn't come for trade or prisoners. They'd come for her. The war had never officially started. The galaxy's silence had become its loudest scream. She couldn't lift her head anymore. Her fingers were numb even through the pressure suit. She blinked the suit HUD into manual override. Last charge reading, 3%. She whispered the emergency code for transmission. The system refused. The override beacon had already been burned out by the orbital EMP burst. They'd planned this down to her final breath. And yet the snow stirred. First a rumble. Then a mechanical groan too deep for any of her tech. Her eyes snapped open despite the fatigue dragging her consciousness away. She heard it before she saw it. Metal on metal, hydraulic breath like a dying god. It wasn't one of theirs. A black mass stepped through the white curtain of storm, not marching but walking, like it wasn't aware this was enemy territory. No insignia. No unit marker. The armor gleamed with frost, matte black, run through with orange bands that pulsed like heartbeat. It didn't announce itself. It didn't need to. She reached for the flare at her side. Her hand wouldn't respond. She wanted to shout. Couldn't. It turned toward her. For a moment, nothing moved. Then it crossed the snowfield in 4 strides, knelt, and lifted her as if her armor weighed nothing. The cold receded from her skin. She saw the curved shell of its helmet, no visor, no facial plate, only the segmented fusion of machine and unknowable alloy. Then warmth. Then blackness. She awoke hours later under a collapsible thermal canopy. She was wrapped in a gravstatic cloak, her suit stripped and repaired with techniques her medics would spend decades reverse engineering. The figure was gone. Only one thing remained. A small black emblem burned into the snow by heat discharge. A circle with a cross through it. It was over. Until it wasn't. The house retrieval force arrived 3 hours later. The soldiers bowed before even touching her. Not in reverence, but fear. The highest-ranking commandant didn't meet her eyes. She was lifted with care, but not addressed. On board the transport, the silence turned suffocating. "What's happened?" she demanded. He didn't speak. What law was invoked? At last he whispered, "You were saved." "I'm aware of that." "Then you know. He has claimed you. It is sealed." Her mouth dried. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Custom requires only the act. He touched you. He bore the consequences. That is binding. That law is ancient. It was ceremonial. Obsolete. The clans will not see it that way. Nor will the people. And neither will the consular council. She stared out at the snow. Somewhere in that frozen desolation, a figure had vanished without name, without question, and had unknowingly restructured her entire world. They tried to reverse it. The council met in secret, then in open war of words. Scholars were summoned, exolinguists, custom historians, codebreakers of ancient pact-binding traditions. But the facts held. The event met every criterion. No loophole. No exception. Not even one clause for alien noncompliance. They issued a formal request to the Terran Directorate for clarification. No response came. In the silence, fear grew. She was not merely a noble. She was heir to a house that controlled 1/3 of the Drygal Accords. Her political bond would anchor future alliances. And now, she was legally bound to a human operative who had left no name and vanished after the act. Whispers of civil fracture stirred. Old houses refused to honor a union outside their species. Rival factions declared the law void. The legalists held firm. Tradition overrode discomfort. She was summoned to a ceremonial chamber lined with ice-root pillars and flame banners. Priests formed a circle. Her father entered without words. He placed the house sigil on her shoulder. And then he turned away. Until the binding is fulfilled, the head priest said, you are no longer of this house, nor any other. You are claimed. She walked out to silence. No one met her gaze. The world she once ruled now held her like a relic. In her quarters, she activated the house archive. Earth files were still classified under partial embargo. But fringe records had leaked into the trade syndicate. She began to read. The first reports seemed exaggerated. Myth. Claims that humans endured 6 gravities unassisted. Stories of their first encounters ending in complete planetary silence, with no sign of survivors. But as she filtered through raw data, patterns emerged. No one had ever seen a human retreat. No one had seen them boast either. They didn't negotiate through fear. They negotiated through aftermath. They built no monuments to conquest. They didn't need to. Her fingers trembled as she played a vid feed, one of only 3 known visual captures of Terran combat. The footage was fragmented, riddled with static. In the final frame, a single human stood atop a burning crawler, holding nothing, saying nothing. The enemies had already stopped breathing. It was always the same. Minimal force, maximal impact, 0 trace. 2 weeks after her rescue, the call came. Not from the human, but from her house. One of their outposts had gone dark, completely. A rival house's fleet had been sighted nearby, in clear violation of peace pact. Her advisors warned her to seek safety. She refused. That night, she received a data pulse. No origin trace. A single set of planetary coordinate. No message. No explanation. She followed it. Her skiff touched down at the edge of the polar ridge. No escort. No weapons. She stepped into the wind. The place was identical. The snow. The silence. Her breath froze in the same pattern on the air. A figure stood 40 meters out. No movement. Just presence. She took 3 steps forward. Then another 10. I didn't ask you to save me, she said. No reply. I didn't want to be married. Not to a myth. Still nothing. But now I see what that means. He turned. She stepped closer. I will honor the binding, she said. But not because your law demands it. Because my people need the reminder that survival isn't a right. It's something you purchase. And the price has just changed. She extended her hand. He reached out, only enough for her fingers to brush the gauntlet. Then he was gone. Back on the capital station, things were worse. News of the House alliance with a human had spread beyond internal politics. Alien nations that once mocked Earth now panicked. Embassies filed demands for clarification. Some began closing their borders. The rival house that had violated peace terms? They vanished. Not just their fleet. Their homeworld. Gone from all scanners. No debris. No explosion. No atmospheric displacement. Just missing. Every species drew the same conclusion. 3 weeks after her last encounter with the Faceless One, a formal decree was broadcast from her house. The union was accepted as binding. No ceremony. No declarations. Just an embedded clause, quietly added to a diplomatic broadcast. The House recognizes the terms of the life-debt oath and affirms alliance through the act of rescue. Galactic response was immediate. 1/3 of the Council abstained from votes until clarity was offered. Trade disputes froze mid-transaction. Military staging fleets began shifting positions with the kind of precision usually reserved for war. Every major interstellar broadcast channel shifted coverage from economic forecasts to theoretical analyses of Terran honor code. She was summoned to a conference hall flanked by hereditary lords and technocrats. Holograms danced in protest behind them, visualizations of the implications of union with an unpredictable Deathworlder species. The speaker stepped forward. "This is political suicide," he said. "We cannot align ourselves with a species that refuses to speak." She answered without raising her voice. They did speak. once. That was enough. That wasn't language. It was destruction. Same thing, she said, if you're not listening. Opposition solidified. 4 allied houses withdrew their envoys. One deployed a surveillance net around their border colonies. Another began recalling trade vessels from Terran-adjacent systems. The consensus wasn't just fear. It was humiliation. A galaxy used to deciphering meaning from gestures had no way to interpret silence that burned. Terran command remained unavailable. They didn't acknowledge broadcasts. No replies. No updates. Just unreadable telemetry, long-range distortion fields, and ghost signatures that blinked in and out of system radars like tricks of a dying sun. She began receiving visitors. Not diplomats. Not warriors. Historians, anthropologists, cultural archivists. They came not to plead, but to understand. They asked about her rescue. They asked about the expression on his mask, the shape of his hand when he lifted her, the angle of his stance as he left. She had no answers. She gave them only what mattered. He saved me. Then disappeared. That should have been the end. Instead, an unsigned diplomatic notice arrived through a private conduit. The sender was unknown. The content was unmistakable. If the binding is incomplete, we will complete it. It wasn't a message. It was a declaration of challenge. She traced the communication to a faction known for rogue military contracts, one of the hybrid houses that lived outside the core laws, recognizing only strength. They had no stake in tradition, only in survival. And to them, an unattached heir was a vulnerability to be exploited. They launched a vessel. Her house scrambled interceptors. The cruiser was intercepted 3 light cycles out and boarded. It was empty. Onboard logs showed it had been unmanned since launch. Its AI systems had been stripped down to guidance only. The entire structure had served as a message. This was no longer about alliance. This was blood sport. The next assault came 3 days later. A medical freighter, stripped of IFF tags, drifted into orbit. Anti-grav systems failed mid-atmosphere. It crashed into the outer gardens of her planetary estate. No casualties, no payload, no weapons. Just one message embedded into the black box. We will not wait for the ceremony. She called a strategic council. This time, she didn't ask for vote. She demanded projections. If war erupted, how many systems would remain loyal? How many houses would break away? How long before enemy fleets capitalized? They gave her estimates, and death counts. Then a second data pulse came. Same pattern. Same untraceable origin. One line of coordinates. No explanation. She didn't hesitate. The journey took 9 hours. No escort. She left the capital in silence and arrived at the outer orbit of a moonless gas giant. No visible installations. No satellites. Just vacuum and gravity. Then the coordinates shifted, adjusted mid-flight. She followed. The new location took her beneath the radiation belt of an unregistered exoplanet. There was no ship in orbit. Then something clicked. The scanner blipped. Space folded. Not like a warp. Not like a drive. Like something had existed there the whole time but only just decided to be seen. A single craft. Matte surface. Flat, seamless plating. No lights. No visible propulsion. It didn't hail her. She moved toward it. The closer she came, the more systems in her ship began to flicker. Guidance. Power. Comms. All down, one by one. Until only navigation remained. A docking clamp extended. She entered the craft without speaking. Inside, silence. Walls pulsed faintly with heat that never reached her. She followed the corridor. At its end, a single room. One chair. One datapad. On the pad, a message. Denied. No signature. She read it twice. Not declined. Denied. She returned to her vessel. Everything powered back up the moment she left the bay. As if nothing had happened. When she arrived back at the capital, a political riot had already begun. A faction within her own house declared the Union void. They cited non-participation by the male party. The ancient laws demanded action. The human had not acknowledged the betrothal. They had called for annulment. In response, a courier drone appeared over the house tower. No radar signature. No launch trail. It simply existed, suspended in space. It projected a single image. A black mark overlaid with orange concentric rings. No known dialect. No formal translation. But across the galaxy, those who had seen similar patterns began to understand. Within 72 hours, 3 of the houses involved in the annulment conference suffered unrelated but simultaneous infrastructure collapses. One lost its orbital tether, killing 2,000. Another had its atmospheric scrubbers overridden by a faultless virus that only deactivated once they transmitted an emergency message off-world. The third house found its planetary comms grid overwritten by a phrase, "You asked." No one admitted responsibility. But every house now accepted that silence didn't mean absence. She stood at the edge of the assembly platform the next day and made her position unambiguous. I will not pursue him. I will not demand him. But I will honor what was done. If he wants nothing from me, that is his right. But no one else will touch what he has claimed. Not without consequence. Not a threat. A statement. Then the rival empire struck. They had been watching. Waiting. And now they moved. 57 warships entered the edge of neutral space. They issued a formal communiqué. They were claiming her for integration into their royal court. They dismissed the prior event as null due to lack of consent from both parties. They cited ancient doctrine allowing secondary retrieval in cases of failed completion. Her house pleaded for intervention. Allies hesitated. She issued one final message across open frequency. If you take me, know what you inherit. The fleets launched. Then went dark. All 57 ships gone. There was no evidence of battle. No debris. No radiation trails. Just absence. When sensors reinitialized, a single signal was found broadcast at a subharmonic wavelength. Encoded into it was a visual packet. A live video feed. A captain from the invading fleet. Kneeling. His uniform was scorched. His hair gone. Behind him, an endless void. No stars. Just black. Her name was now spoken in hushed reverence, but not because of lineage. Not because of duty. Because she had been the closest thing the galaxy had to a bridge with something no one understood. He still hadn't returned. Not with words. Not with ship. Not with formal acknowledgement. And yet entire empires realigned based on where they thought he might go next. Several governments attempted to replicate the event. Simulated near-death scenarios involving their nobility. Human operatives were deployed nearby. But nothing happened. The humans observed, recorded, extracted, and left. No acts of rescue. No engagement. No claims. Whispers emerged that he had acted alone. That even the Directorate had no control over him. If that were true, then he was more dangerous than any army, because he answered to nothing. Her own position changed. She no longer sat with her house in council chambers. She had transcended that role. Now she was consulted from afar, her words relayed with care, her tone interpreted like prophecy. She offered no commandments. She passed no laws. She simply remained. The rival houses who had once tried to annul the Union dissolved or faded from relevance. One tried again to provoke. They kidnapped a minor functionary affiliated with Earth's diplomatic station on Varus 9. He was unharmed. The response, however, was not. A magnetic field the size of a planetary ring enveloped their capital world. Not a weapon. A signature. It disrupted nothing. Caused no death. But every system, every satellite, every AI-generated thought process inside that field broadcast a repeating phrase into the mind of anyone listening. We are watching. Then it vanished. They issued an apology broadcast in every known language, followed by unconditional surrender of all diplomatic interests beyond their homeworld. Earth never replied. She studied every pattern of his appearance. Each time, it began with silence, then action, then silence again. There was no escalation, just inevitability. She began to understand why he hadn't returned, why he hadn't tried to speak. The moment he did, the mystique would break. The illusion wasn't his power, it was their ignorance. He let them fear what they invented, and that fear kept them in line better than fleets ever could. But she was not afraid. She knew what the silence meant. So she called him. Not with words, not with messages. She went back, to the frozen ridge where it began. No entourage, no declaration, just her and the memory of a hand that had once lifted her out of death. She stood there for hours. Wind howled. Snow sliced against her skin. She waited. The stars dimmed. Then he was there. No sound. No light. One moment empty. The next full. He walked until they were a pace apart. She raised her hand. Opened her palm. Inside was not her sigil, but his emblem, carved into a crystal fragment. She had forged it herself. Not as a symbol of submission, but recognition. He didn't take it. Just look. She spoke. You saved me. Without demand. Without expectation. The galaxy made it more than it was. But now I make it real. She knelt, placing the crystal into the snow. I bind myself to you. Not because I must. Because I choose. He said nothing. But he didn't leave. He stood still as the snow rose around them. And then, after a pause that stretched past language, he turned. Walked. Paused. Looked back. She followed. When they returned, nothing changed outwardly. There was no ceremony. No announcement. But the other houses felt it. She no longer answered to her clan. She no longer belonged to the ancient rites. She had joined something older. Not tradition. Not culture. Intention. In the cycles that followed, a new alliance emerged, not written, not negotiated. A web of systems that aligned themselves to her orbit simply to avoid offense. Not to Earth. To her. Because wherever she stood, the faceless one might stand next. The unspoken consequence of touching what belonged to him had been burned into every empire's memory. Then came the final test. A militant expansionist power, newly risen on the edge of galactic civilization, saw weakness in the old houses. They broadcast their contempt for Earth, mocking the silence. They claimed the entire diplomatic chain around her as illegitimate. They demanded her surrender, and when refused, they struck. The attack came fast. Hypersplice warships targeting the trade arteries of 7 systems. Civilian convoys destroyed. Infrastructure decimated. 20,000 dead in 4 hours. They believed Earth would hesitate to act on symbolic ties. They were wrong. He returned. Not with a fleet. Not with weapons. With proof. In less than 1 rotation, every warship in the attacking force received a data burst. Not a virus. A simulation. One that activated instantly across neural interfaces and visual relays. It showed each of their vessels exploding in perfect synchrony. Not real, just a glimpse. A preview of a timeline where they continued forward. Then their systems reactivated. One captain ignored the warning. Fired. Nothing happened. At first. Then, over their homeworld, the sun changed color. It did not go dark. It shimmered, red, then white, then violet. All energy harvesting systems failed. Communications disintegrated. Gravitational fields fluctuated. Then the color vanished. And everything returned. Except their faith in war. Their ships turned back. They sued for peace before their diplomats could form a sentence. She didn't speak publicly. But the message spread. Across every system, the phrase was translated, broadcast, echoed. Do not touch what he has lifted. Some questioned whether he truly existed, or if he was simply the personification of human retaliation, a myth created by fear. But she had stood beside him. She knew better. She returned to her world without guards. She didn't need them. Her people didn't protect her because she ruled. They protected her because they knew who watched. For decades, she shaped policy, not through force, but anticipation. Whole civilizations shifted around her like satellites pulled by gravity too subtle to escape. No one tested her again. Not directly. One final act closed the cycle. A rogue state attempted to recreate the conditions of her rescue. They engineered a crash site, planted biosignatures of nobility, waited. He didn't come. Instead, a message was burned into the crust of their world. A sentence etched miles long. You don't summon what you didn't earn. She never saw him again. But she never needed to. Because the galaxy had been reshaped not by weapons or conquest, but by the weight of one unnoticed action. A single rescue. A simple hand outstretched. Not in dominance. Not in strategy. But choice. And in the vacuum that followed, empires fell silent. Not from fear. From respect. The kind no law can command. Only the unknown can demand. And he remained unknown. By design. By will. Forever faceless. But never forgotten.